Very interesting conversation has been sparked in the Narrative Reflections group from our open discussion yesterday that carries on today. Um, and it was the question comes from a younger member of our group, and she's talking about the in the context of this particular story by a woman named Molly Calkin, I believe is how her last name is pronounced. I could have that wrong. And I've done a little bit of reading about her myself recently just to kind of get up to speed on what was going on there. Um, the story of this woman is to try to be very quick and objective about it as possible, is that she um, was living in a marriage that she was mildly, or she was under the surface very discontent with, but when she was confronted with a cancer diagnosis, she suddenly realized this was not the situation she wanted to be in, and completely abandoned that relationship and proceeded to engage on a mission of self-discovery. We'll just put it that way. um, but this member's question was really like, okay, this person was at a middle point in her life, and she got had this epiphany, and she had to do all this kind of essentially self-destructive, not really self-destructive, destructive behavior to finally live the way that she wanted to and face the slings and arrows of society for doing so. How can I live my life in a way where I don't have that kind of situation where I've piled up all these regrets, so I'm a little more self-actualized and don't have to take such drastic measures? Can I avoid this? Right? It's a good question. Great question for somebody who's in their mid 20s. Man, if I had that sort of insight and started talking about those kinds of things at that point in my life, maybe things would have worked out a little differently for me. And so a lot of us older members have a lot to say on this subject because we have a lot of experience, and of course we all have a lot of things we may prefer to have done differently, or our own regrets, or our own situations in life that we're dealing with the aftermath of having our own epiphanies and our own destructive things that we've had to do to come around to living a way that we very much prefer. But to start with the story of Molly Calkin, I find it very interesting how her story is framed from a social dynamic, because we cannot ignore the gender dynamic that is involved with this, even though the issue at play really has nothing to do with gender at all. Because if the genders were reversed, okay, we would not really find this story very interesting, and we'd probably be a lot more quick to judge and all that other stuff. But because this is a woman that is doing this, we're able to take a more nuanced approach to this. Did she do the right thing? And whatnot, and how are we judging her and all that other stuff? And that's okay. I think that's actually okay, because it helps us give a good frame for the again, the larger issue at play, without ignoring the fact that there is a patriarchal dynamic. I really don't like that term very much, because it always seems to imply like men are all of us are somehow in charge and overbearing. So I assure you, it's not the case, man. You know, um, just like any of these other kind of broad generalizations that can be used to paint that brush with. But again, we cannot ignore the fact that women have had a double standard almost their entire throughout history, and still are faced with a lot of the conventions that deal with them differently than men are dealt with in similar situations. Okay, so essentially, she wasn't in a particularly terrible relationship, but it sounds like her ex-husband was pretty controlling, and she kind of knuckled under to the social conventions that she was doing what she was supposed to as a wife, and all of these other things. Now they're quick to point out she did not have children, because of course we have expectations about people and their dependents, and that should always be a factor. And when we're talking about our own happiness, we should be thinking about the people that truly are relying upon us, um, in our own discoveries of the self and what actions we take. We should be always considerate. And another member, as we've been having these discussions, is in a situation where they have a dependent that they're concerned about, and they're it's not their favorite thing, but there is still a sense of responsibility there, and that can't be ignored either as part of it. And that's kind of part of the happiness quotient here too, is that you're not going to feel really great if you leave someone who is truly relying upon you out to suffer in the streets because you decided you want to go to Timbuktu and live your best life or whatever, right? So there is that part of it. But Molly Cocken, um, the part of it, the story that makes it so salacious and so interesting to society is because her mission of self-discovery, they are also very quick to point out, was that she slept with almost 200 men. Now, that's actually kind of an interesting nuance there because her physical ailments prevented her from actually engaging in some of the activities that we would expect from somebody engaging with others in this way. So she was a bit more creative and found a lot more other kinds of expression that not only she, but others that she was engaging with were doing in living their own best lives and in expressing themselves in a way that made them happier or whatever, right? But of course, what we're looking at from society's kind of very quick to judge view is this woman abandoned her responsibilities to go on a sex quest. And that's kind of what happened, I say. But it's really about why are we judging her so harshly? Okay. Well, my contention, my contention is that in almost every one of these relationships, and it's again not gender bound, is that there's a giver and a taker. And it doesn't always have to be a romantic relationship that has this situation either. Families do this a lot. There's a giver and a taker, and the person who gives ends up a lot of times ceding a lot of their own personal boundaries and their own territory, so to speak, so that this taker will stay in their lives. They want whatever it is that they're getting from that other person, the love, the attention, whatever. But they feel like this is a condition in order to maintain that relationship. And then there's also social convention, right? If you've bound yourself in holy matrimony, there is a social convention that says that you're supposed to stick around no matter what, for better or for worse, right? For better or for worse, for who is not often asked in that particular question. And sometimes people find that as time goes by, in the situation that they've put themselves in that did initially make them happy, they may have done things that were, I call it living dishonestly, where they're not really understanding, perhaps even to themselves, where their boundaries lie. And by the time they realize their boundaries have been crossed, it's almost too late. They have to exert force, they have to exert energy to push people back to where they would be comfortable. And that creates anxiety and stress and may even destroy the relationship, which they don't necessarily want. And also too, a lot of times, because that relationship is tied in with other social expectations, that when you lose that relationship, then a lot of other relationships get destroyed in the process. I know this very personally. And there are other people I know, same thing. If you belong to a church and you're married to somebody and you're having a hard time with it, and the church is aware of it, they're like, you got to do your duty. You got to stick around. You can't just walk away from this. So if you do, that whole society that you've embedded yourself in will reject you. Suddenly, those people who were your best friends aren't even talking to you anymore. They're not sympathetic. Sometimes I think this is a sour grape situation, right? They themselves are unhappy. They're sticking it out. How dare you walk away and live your best life when I am not going to do that? I haven't gotten to a point where I'm willing to sacrifice that, or maybe I'm not quite as unhappy. Certainly not to a point where I feel like everything else is worth burning down for, right? But of course, we're judging her through a patriarchal lens. Okay, well, she just wanted to get her freak on with as many men as possible is kind of how it's framed by the detractors of these people. This is a similar story with Eat, Pray, Love, right? It's similar situation. She had been living according to everybody else's expectations of her, and she's finally had enough, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna go. My time is short, and I want to have some of what I want out of this life before I give up the ghost. And we oftentimes call this a midlife crisis, especially when it happens to men. And we make fun of them. Oh, he's riding around in a Corvette now, and he's got a girlfriend that's half his age. Ha ha ha! Right? What a shallow human being he is, and he's hurt people. He's abandoned them. Right? And sometimes that's the case, right? If you leave your three kids with your wife and you go and take all the money and all that other stuff, that's not good. I think someone is fairly judged when you're not being equitable about things. And people who are hurt when you say everything's great and then suddenly blow up and are like, no, this isn't great, this isn't what I want, they're shocked by this. you know I thought everything was all right. you know Even though they've been taking all these things, they didn't necessarily realize the dynamic that they were feeding into, but they had those expectations. But a lot of times we blame the victim, is what I would argue. Okay. And I will give a good example of this. So there have been many times in my life where I have housed a family member who is on hard times for whatever reason or another, and they kind of just throw up their hands when they come under my roof, and I'll be going to work day in and day out while they lounge around on the couch and watch TV or whatever it is that they're doing, eating my food, living under my roof. And there's some resentment that generates from that, right? Because I'm certainly contributing more than my fair share to put up somebody who should be able to take care of themselves. Now, it's not to say I don't want to help, but when they're capable, I would expect them to be trying to get themselves back in working order, because I have done that myself. I have couch surfed. I've been in a situation, but during that whole time in my life, I was working doggedly to get out of there, and trying to make myself unobtrusive and trying to be helpful as much as I could. And when I finally got myself into a position I could get out, I did, even though it was hard. it was a big risk to get out of there as early as I did, but I did it, and I was thankful. I was like, thank you for everything you've done, and now I'm gonna make it on my own, and hopefully I won't need to rest on your under a roof again. And I kind of expect that of other people, and a lot of people don't do that if they're takers, right? And there's a lot of takers in the world. And especially people that are not in the dynamic, people who are outside of it, okay? This happened in the relationship. You have a giver and a taker, and there's a homeostasis that is created, and they see this great working relationship that's happening. But under the hood, it's because one person is doing a whole lot more for the other than the other is contributing, so to speak. And so there is friction happening, but on the outside, it looks great. And so they see, oh, this is a model of a great relationship. Everything is good going on here. So when one member finally says, I've had it, I'm not participating anymore, that society, the family or the church or whatever it happens to be, looks at that and they say, that person's suddenly selfish. They've abandoned this other person who is relying upon them. They are the bad guy. Even though under the hood, what's happened is that person has been bled dry and they just can't take it anymore. This sometimes happens when people are confronted with things like their own death or they have a near death experience, or somebody they know dies, or something else of that traumatic nature happens that just rattles their cage and makes them realize, oh my god, I only have so much time on this earth. But it doesn't always have to require a catalyst. But when it happens, that person is often viewed very negatively, as I was when I finally got to a point with these family members where I'm like, look, you are capable, and I am tired of having to continually do this for you. I'm not seeing any effort on your part. It's time for you to make your own way. That person views me as the jerk. The rest of the family who sees everything's working okay, you're helping them. Well, now you cut off that help. Now you're the bad guy because you're not helping anymore. But very rarely in these situations do we as a society look at that and we see that wounded person, that person who's hurt, that person who's been cut off, and say, what was the imbalance here? And how much did that person who's being cut off contribute to the situation that came at play? But there is a lot of blame to be given to the person who blows up, because what has probably happened is that they have given and given and given and communicated things are okay, right? And they've not given enough strong communication, that their boundaries have been crossed, and they're continually feeling anxiety and stress and whatever else, that because it's expected, they've got to keep doing it, until they finally realize, this is so bad for me. I'm under so much pressure and so much stress that I have to do something to change this situation, and it's much more violent than expected. Whereas if they were living honestly, and by that term I mean trying to be honest to yourself and honest with others about what your boundaries are, and establishing rules and sticking to those rules so that nobody is surprised. You may still be viewed as a jerk. You're still probably going to be viewed as a jerk, but at least it's not nearly as bad because look, I said these boundaries were being crossed and you've crossed the boundaries, what have you. You can be here for 3 weeks. That's the maximum, or you have to show me 10 job applications that you put in every day or something like that. That sounds like a strict, rigid, draconian asshole that is doing that to that person who is couch surfing, doesn't it? A lot of people view it that way. But it is fair to establish those kind of boundaries when you're the giver in these circumstances. But if you're not communicating those boundaries and you continue to allow people to set up camp and start laying foundations and building homes, so to speak, inside your boundaries, when you're unhappy with where they are, it's only going to get worse. I call that borrowing with interest. You're avoiding the anxiety. You're keeping happy by allowing those boundaries to be crossed and letting them continue to live there. And you'll deal with it in other ways. You'll cope. This is how relationships fall apart in other ways. People start doing stuff that they're not really supposed to do. They are being very dishonest by trying to find other outlets to make themselves happy in a situation that is ultimately untenable for them. Okay. But it is coupled with responsibility too. That's the other part, right? If you have minor children, breaking up is a big deal. There's no question. You're hurting other people that are helpless to deal with the aftermath. They're caught in the middle. It's unfortunate, but the reality is, if one parent is being ground down and feels helpless, and there's a dynamic there where one person is just unhappy but suffering through it, the other is doing just fine, and everything seems copacetic more or less for everybody else's perspective, they're going to be hurt. Everyone is going to feel like you're a bad person. That's what happens. That person is the bad person. That person is the bad guy. And you will lose friends. You will lose family. You will lose society if you do that because you've been living dishonestly. Whereas perhaps if you had kept those boundaries up to begin with, you would have avoided that particular scenario. Not to say that the relationship would stick around. You have to be willing to have the abundance mentality to understand that if they aren't willing to meet your boundaries, they're not the person for you, is part of it. You're so desperate for that attention, for that love, especially in the beginning, that you concede too much too fast and now find yourself stuck in a situation. So Molly Calkin, when she left her husband, she made a podcast. There's a 6-piece podcast that talks about her experience. And she did it with a friend, and she did die. She died of cancer eventually. And even that she has a note it's like a posthumous note that she wrote that to be released upon her death. That was like, thanks for all the fish, everyone. This has been an experience. Hope you learned something, kind of thing. But it's only now that they're starting to make a movie about this, a TV show. That I know is not going to be it's probably not going to be as nuanced as one would hope. Chances are pretty good the husband's going to be portrayed as just this overbearing jerk, very one-dimensional. That's my expectation. And this person is going to be living their best life, and there will be some drama, but relatively the drama is going to be about the society and the expectations that have been being unfairly delivered to her, and how it's portrayed that she is living her best life and to hell with society. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just have figured it's probably going to be a little lopsided in that regard, because the husband's going to have his feelings too. He wanted to help her get through her cancer or whatever. She was like, I've got a death diagnosis and I'm not going to live crappily. And he's like, no, you can fight this, and don't give up the ghost. Don't give up hope, and don't do this to me and to everyone else. And you're flailing about because you're feeling this particular way. You're abandoning your life. That's kind of how his perspective is kind of portrayed. If you look at it, at least somewhat objectively, it may still to be selfish. I don't want you to leave, all that other stuff. But he's telling her to fight and not to ruin everything that you have. in this short-sighted, destructive manner. So he has a point, I think. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that who's benefiting most from that particular arrangement? Well, chances are pretty good him. He wants her to live longer, going through chemo, all that suffering that she would have to go through to do what would be expected of you to hope to try to survive a diagnosis like that, which is not very effective most of the time. Stage 4 is a big deal. Gets in your bones, gets in your liver, all that other stuff. Your quality of life is probably not going to be great, even if you manage to fight it for another 20 years or something like that. You're gonna be suffering from it. But more likely, what's going to happen is it's just you're going to be fighting it and fighting it and fighting it, and it's just going to wither you away. And that whole fight is you're just going to be fighting it until you die. I've seen it happen to people. I've seen it happen to one person. I lived through one person doing that. Stage 4 melanoma diagnosis. Fought it, because that's what they were supposed to do. And at the end, nearing the end, said a lot of things that indicated that they were not living how they wanted to, and now they had all those regrets. And they died with all those regrets. Another person I know, my aunt, blew it all up after the kids got old enough to do so. Her husband wasn't so great, and she suffered through it for the kids, as a lot of people do. And then when the kids were old enough, she's like, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. The family hated her for it, including her kids. Everyone hated her. The last time I saw her, this is probably 10 years ago now. God, it's been a long time. I was sitting on the porch of my cousin's house with her. It was a summer. And it was a brief time that I actually got to speak with her alone. And I remember this feeling of peace, this serenity that was just coming off of her in waves, man. Because she had gotten out of that, she'd gone through that nasty divorce and all those slings and arrows of breaking up with her husband and all the crap that her kids were giving her. Obviously, she was at my cousin's house, so she wasn't kicked out of the house, but her daughter had plenty of choice feelings about it. But she was now with this other man that she had found, was after she had gone through all that loved her for who she was, and they lived together, and they were poor as dirt. They were really struggling to make two ends meet, but they were so happy, and she was so happy. And she expressed to me that it was all worth it. It was all worth it. And she got a cancer diagnosis and died only a few years later. But she got those 5 years. She got those 5 years of actually living according to how she wanted to on her terms. And she had to fight to get there. And she did not know at the time, but she only had a limited time left. And at least she got that. At least she got that. The people who judge us the harshest are the people who are expecting us to do stuff for them and live according to a set of rules. Suddenly they find that they have to be under their own power, and they have to make do, not without the expectation anymore that you're going to keep doing stuff for them, that you're not going to keep giving stuff to them, and that they're going to have to figure it out. And it drives them nuts, boy. It drives them nuts when that happens. The takers in life, when they find out their givers have started to reestablish their boundaries, or they've decided that this deal is not beneficial to them anymore. I want out of this deal. I do not want to participate anymore. But you promised. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, but I can't contribute anymore. But that's no good. You're a bad person. And then that's the thing at the end of the day, in my mind. What are we judging them for? What is the crime that they are committing? To live according to their own rules, and to be under their own power, and to let everybody else live under their own power? Why is that such a bad thing? Everybody else has to be responsible for themselves now. I'm not responsible for you. You have to take care of it yourself. Now, granted, in certain situations like my own, there were sacrifices that were made as part of the arrangement. And so there has to be a compensation, a maintenance, so to speak, to make up for the fact that somebody sacrificed maybe their career or their education or whatever, and that the other person, there's a power dynamic there where you have to kind of offset. All right, well, this is kind of the compensation, so to speak, for the fact that you made those sacrifices in that agreement that we had so that you can operate under your own power. I think that's fair. I do. You know, but it just kind of goes to show you that even when you decided you don't want to keep contributing anymore, you still got to a lot of the times. Society still expects it. And men are treated differently than women. A lot of the cases, women, if they leave their kids behind, boy, that is a terrible judgment they receive there. Men abandon their children too. They get the term deadbeat dad and all that other stuff. Nobody looks very highly on it. But women who do it, that is a sin beyond the pale, right? Are they being selfish? Probably. But nevertheless, if they can't do it anymore, is that the best situation for the kid if they're there miserably day in and day out, being awful to them because they really don't want to be there and everyone else is expecting them to toe that line? I don't know. I don't know about that. Every situation is unique. But if we took Molly Cochran and made her husband the other way, we would not be so sympathetic. If her husband left her behind to go on a sex quest because he was tired of that arrangement, we do not like that. That is a cut and dry, you're a selfish son of a bitch kind of equation. But how is it any different? That's all I would ask. Patriarchal tropes and all that other stuff notwithstanding, it's not much different if he did that too. Now, part of that patriarchal aspect has to do with how we frame these things, right? And a lot of that has to do with our social expectations that still remain even after our enlightened period of the last 70, 80 years or whatever, that we've been living through a couple generations now of modern feminism. And we still have this trope, though. If the woman is unhappy in a relationship like that, that's the husband is overbearing, he's controlling, he's abusive, perhaps. You know, there is a power dynamic, and the power dynamic a lot of times come from the rest of the stuff in society that basically does give men a leg up in a lot of ways. But when men are in that dynamic, we view them a little differently, and a lot of times we view them as weak, right? We talk about the browbeaten husband or the henpecked husband who's being ground down in a similar fashion, who's just, yes, dear, yes, dear. But we don't have nearly as much sympathy for him. But it's the same situation. He is giving, that other person is taking. And he is losing a bit of himself day in and day out, and may die with regrets as well. Or blow up at some point in his finally realizing that he doesn't want to live this way any longer. We are getting to a better point in society, I think, where we can mutually have these conversations and say, okay, look, this is just not working. Let us just handshake and get out of here. And I would say that to some extent, that's kind of how it worked out with my situation. But even still, I lost everything. Everyone hates me. Everyone hates me on that side of the family. But on the flip side, I didn't have any friends. My life was completely dedicated to living this way that basically just was given everything I had to the needs and desires of another person. And to get out of that situation, I had to lose that all so that I could have friends again, so I could do things that I wanted to do again, so that I could live according to my own terms. There's a lot of suffering that I went through to make that happen. So I have a lot of sympathy for someone like Molly Cochran, who I was certainly not faced with that. I was faced with different kind of crisis, I suppose. But for her to say, this isn't working for me and I'm not going to do it anymore, I get it. I totally do. And she shouldn't have to. No one should. And when you're quick to judge somebody because they got out of a situation, be very cognizant that you probably don't know what was going on under the hood. You probably had a certain expectation of what that person was supposed to do. And the reason why people are so upset is because, not because they're living their best life, but because they're not doing what everyone else expected them to do for their own benefit. There was something they were getting out of that relationship, and that's why they're unhappy that it's not happening anymore. They're expecting this pinata to keep giving out the goodies, man. Keep giving those goodies. As long as that pinata is there and kicking out goodies, I'm fine. The second the goodies stop, where's my goodies? Where's my goodies? You mean I have to come up with my own goodies? I don't know. That's not the arrangement. This person is the person who supplies my goodies. Hey, everyone, you see this person? They're not giving me my goodies anymore. What an asshole. They're kicking me out of the house. I've been living here rent free for 3 months, and now they're telling me I can't do that anymore? How dare they? Chris Rock, I think it was, had a stand up thing about leaving a girl that said, you know, you left the restaurant. Why do you keep expecting steak? you know, why do you feel entitled to the steak still? You know, and I may have decided I'm closing the doors. I'm not serving steak anymore. But you're banging at the door saying, "Where's my steak? I've come to expect this steak. I'm gonna fight for my steak that you're supposed to give me." That happens too. I've worked with, or talked with rather, a lot of divorcees or people who are separated going through divorce, where the argument is all about the money, and they're vicious about it, man. It's all about the money. I want my steak. I want my bigger chunk of the steak. I want as much steak as I can get out of this now that I've put in so much to the relationship. Notwithstanding that, hey man, maybe you should maybe get your own steak, make your own steak. But in all, really what I wanted to answer to that member's question was there's a term I brushed upon earlier is living honestly. Living honestly. Try to do your best and analyze what it is that you want and particularly what you don't. There's a line in the book Fight Club. If you don't know what you want, you'll end up with a lot you don't. That is true, man. There's probably no truer thing in life, especially in American society. You're presented with all these choices. What school to go with, what person to go with, what thing to buy, what house to live in, what city to live in, right? You're so free. What are you going to do? Limited to your own resources and opportunity costs, right? We make choices. We do. We have to. We have to make choices. But at a certain point, it may be that you end up with something you don't want and you got to get out of there. But now you've got yourself mired in a situation where everybody else is expecting you to continue participating in this agreement. And to back out of it is going to cost you significantly in a lot of ways. And the earlier you are at identifying these things and at establishing those boundaries and making sure everybody understands that those boundaries exist and that they stay on the other side of those boundaries, the longer everyone can perpetuate a relationship that is mutually beneficial and makes everyone happy. Because when you live honestly that way and are saying, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not willing to do. And if you cross that line, I can't have it. I'm not pushing you away, but you may leave if you don't like it, because I'm not going to do that. Whatever it is, whatever those boundaries are. Or I'm going to be doing this thing and you're not, this is not working for me. I'm going to continue on my own path. I'm sorry that hurts you, but fare thee well and enjoy your life or whatever. Just establishing your own boundaries for your own self. That you avoid a lot of the problems that a lot of people have in relationships later on down the line. It's true that relationships require work, and that work should be honest communication about what is and isn't working for you and trying to find some sort of compromise that you both find agreeable. You can't get by without compromise. This is true. And when it comes to your responsibility, right? Sometimes you have to take care of people that you're obligated to, or they're going to really suffer. They're truly going to suffer. You have somebody who's an invalid in your family. You have to figure out what you're going to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean what they want you to do. That may not mean what society wants you to do. You know, another family member was handicapped that I know, and no one wanted to take care of him. Everyone else was cool with you taking care of him. And it was a great burden on them, and they felt it was a great sacrifice when they turned him back to you, that you take care of him. but would really rail on your ass if you didn't take care of him. In this particular case, my ex's uncle was mentally handicapped. He was not capable really of living on his own. He could live in a group home type situation, and that's eventually where he ended up. Because originally he was living with my father-in-law, the oldest brother. He was the youngest. With when he had his wife, but when his wife passed away, suddenly the dynamic was a lot harder because now he had this person that he was taking care of. It was his brother, his family for sure. He felt a sense of obligation, but it was too much for him. And eventually, he found a group home that he could put him up in, and he took care of it. There was a financial contribution and all this other stuff. And I think at the end of the day, his brother was happier in that situation because he was with a bunch of other people like him, and they did activities and all these other things. It was a much better life for him in the long run. But the rest of the family was very judgmental about it. How dare you put him in a home? It sounds awful, but it actually was pretty cool. I saw it myself. I'm like, wow, they got like a common room and they all hang out and they play games and whatever else. I mean, it was like living in a dorm for him. It wasn't so bad. Not at all. I would argue it was better than his living situation with my father-in-law. But the family let him have it about that. Well, will you take him? No. No, no, no. We don't ask that. We don't have the ability. We don't have the time. We don't have the money, the resources, the energy. Right? They always back away from that. Other family members would call us about different family members. Oh, this guy's in trouble. You should take care of him. How about you take care of him? How about call someone else and have them take care of him? Oh. Or another one that's very simple. All our baby things or whatever, our family mementos and stuff like that. You take care of them. We would take care of that stuff. Okay, well, we're moving. We don't have the space for it. So you want it? Oh, you're supposed to take care of it. No, we're asking, do you want it? Because we're going to do something else with it. Oh, how dare you? All that stuff. When you take on the level of responsibility like that, people come to expect it. And when you try to push that back to them, when you change the arrangement, they feel betrayed. How dare you ask me to do the thing that I've been asking you to do for all this time? Be wary of that. Be cognizant of the agreements that you've come up with, that you've tolerated, because if you change your mind down the road, people may not like the situation you've come up with, the new solution that works for you. They may not like it because they liked the way it was working for them because they didn't have to contribute, or they didn't have to contribute nearly as much. Now I'm asking you to put in more. You have to own some of this stuff. You have to take care of the uncle. You have to do this, that, or the other. I can't do that. Yes, you can. You have as much power as I do in this life most of the time. We don't always have that luxury either. There's another guy that I'm thinking about who has a family member who is dependent on him, and he's like, we got to watch out for being selfish. And he's right. He's right. You can't just toss someone out on the street and make them suffer. But he's unhappy. It's one of the other things that he's communicated. Well, what are you unhappy about? And what of that can you change? How drastic this be? It's going to cause anxiety because you're helping this other person. Chances are pretty good in the way they want you to, but not in a way that you want to. And your boundaries have been encroached. And to push back on those boundaries to a place where you feel happy, so to speak, in the level of responsibility you're willing to take on, the part that you really want to take care of, but in a way that works for you, may not be the way they want it. And that part, if they're not willing to meet what your needs are, then you realize that there's an imbalance. And if you want to be happy, you have to address those imbalances, and no one is going to do it but you. And yes, you will be judged. Your society will not like you, giver, when you finally say, I'm done giving. It's how it works. I'm sorry. So, in conclusion, know thyself as best you can. Ask questions. God, it's so nice to hear these younger kids asking questions like this. They're asking for advice like that. Not, man, if I had been asking, those are the right questions to ask. If I had been asking those questions, I may have lived a better life than I am now. I'm living a better life now. I'm happier now, even though there's sadness involved. But at least now I'm at least able to say, well, if I die tomorrow, at least I was living true to my own values instead of someone else's vision of what I should be doing for them. And me being happy with that arrangement because it's making them not anxious. Let other people own their anxieties. Let other people own their responsibilities. Be willing to help, but know when your resources are tapped out. Do that before the resentment sets in, before their expectations get solidified and everybody is surprised by your sudden change in behavior. If they know who they're dealing with up front and what the deal is, it's only on them at that point, whether they're willing to accept that or not. You know, all right, I'll live under your roof for 3 weeks. I did that with someone else, a family member. You got till this date and you're out by this date. Threw their hands up in the air, didn't do jack. That date come around, I started packing their stuff and putting it in the car. You were serious? Yes, I was. Because I'm done doing this. I continue to put this hand out and I continue to get taken advantage of. So this is what I've offered you. It has run out. Sorry, you haven't figured it out. Find someone else to put up with it because I'm done. You're an asshole. But you know what? At least I did not continue to put up with it to avoid the anxiety in that particular circumstance. It's hard to do. People put a lot of expectations on us, and our society expects a lot from us. And a lot of it is invisible. You know, again, I don't really like the term patriarchy, but patriarchy makes both genders suffer. The expectations that it has on us that deny us our own internal self-determination and desire for our own well-being in living a way that we want to. And sometimes that's going to rattle other people's cages. That's on them. If you're living in a way that other people don't like, that's on them. As long as you're not hurting anybody, you're living not a criminal life, you know, your consent is always involved, all that other stuff. If somebody's not happy with the way you're doing things, tough shit, man. That's a tough attitude to, because we want acceptance. We want people to like us. We don't want to be cast out by society. But I've learned I'd rather be cast out than to continue living a dishonest life. And what I mean that is by not being honest with myself and with others about what I need, because it ends up making things worse down the road. So that's all I have to say.